What's happening, guys, and welcome back to another Sunday Scan. If you are joining us for the first time, we are Investors Underground, and every single week we go over a bunch of things that are happening in the market to get you prepared for the week ahead. So I'm going to get right into Sunday Scan this week. We're going to pull up some charts, and we're just going to go through all the recent volatility and get into it. Before we do that, though, I'll give a couple of announcements. One is a disclaimer that none of this is financial advice, and these are not buy or sell recommendations. Everything is for informational and educational purposes only. The other thing is that IU is still, we were running that 2-week trial for $49. We had that running last week. A ton of people signed up. It's a great way to see, behind the curtain in IU. And I'm going to push to keep that open for one more day for Sunday Scan listeners. So we'll have that open for another 24 hours just for Sunday Scan listeners, even though the deal is closed to everyone else. So let's get right into Scan for the week. We had a ton of volatility. And really a good way to measure that on a forward basis is the VIX. So just by tracking the VIX, and that's basically the market's representation of the 30-day forward volatility. So if the market is expecting a bunch of things to get volatile in the weeks ahead, then the VIX is a good measure for that. And then you have more fractal or shorter term measures of the VIX, kind of day to day. But this is like a very common and good representation of like forward looking volatility. So why did the VIX spike so much? What was going on this week? Why was there so much volatility? And why was SPY all over the place, or SPX? So basically, in short, you had a confluence of things really come together this week. One of them was you had things like Zion, which is a bank, a regional bank, report some credit losses, and that kind of spooked the credit market. So you had some big volatility off of that. The VIX spiked there, and that was kind of like one part of the puzzle. The other part of the puzzle was we have upcoming China negotiations between the Trump administration and China, and that's going to be a big factor for the market. And so basically, as that is being priced in the upcoming week or weeks, that is also going to contribute to some volatility there. Another factor is that we are really getting into Q3 earnings season right now. So you have some big players like Netflix and Tesla reporting this week, and then you're going to have some of the other Mag 7 names reporting shortly. So basically, all these things are coming together where you have these big factors or things happening over the next couple of weeks in the market. And so I think part of that, and then spurred by some things with the credit market, that really spooked the VIX, and that's what caused part of the recent surge. So the VIX is starting to mean revert a little bit. It's very difficult for it to stay up at levels like that unless it's constantly being fed more and more kind of, I don't want to say bad news, but things that could potentially cause volatility. So that is definitely something to keep on watch for the week ahead, just to see how the VIX reacts. And typically, if you have factors that are driving the VIX higher, such as credit issues, such as trade negotiations or whatever, if those things resolve, you'll usually have the VIX kind of melt as people now have a better understanding of how that will impact the market volatility. So another thing that we really saw is a huge unwind in a ton of speculative sectors this past week. So you had things like in the critical mineral space, a ton of unwinds there. You had a ton of things in the quantum space mean revert. And then you've had, continual action over the China negotiations hit things in the sector there. So a lot of things, especially, in the regional banking sector, that was a huge one. KRE, which is kind of the measure for the regional banks, or the index for that, was down almost 7%. That is not a normal thing to be happening when you have a banking ETF down 7% in one day. So that Zion credit loss scare was really something that came in. So I'm just kind of laying the groundwork here. You also have some parabolic moves in gold that we will go over. And so there was just a lot of things moving in the market. So I'll kind of tie in these market thoughts into the main watches and just run through everything pretty quickly this week. So the first thing is, as we have those upcoming Chinese negotiations, a lot of the edge that's going to come from this market, in my opinion, is going to be the separation between winners and losers, relative strength versus relative weakness. And all that means is that if you were to look at the index or a basket of stocks in a sector, that is kind of like the average. And then you're going to have, part of the names, maybe half the names or a couple of the names that are performing way better, and a couple of names that are performing way worse. And so if you have, a directional view on a sector, for instance, like regional banking or China or anything like that, it's always good to have, at least one of those names that's relative strength and one of those names that's relative weakness. And that is a huge, edge in this market. If you're looking for continuation higher or continuation lower, you already have your names mapped out. So Baidu is a relative weakness name. It has, ties to China, also ties to AI and everything. We've also seen some shakeups in the AI sector. Recently, you had things like Alab and some others that are starting to act way, way different. And the AI sector is starting to pick its winners and losers now. And especially with the upcoming earnings season, that is going to be a big separator between those two. So Baidu is on watch for relative weakness. If there's any bad China news, if any of the negotiations go south, then I think this is going to be one that can mean revert even further. It's already had a normal mean reversion, and it's getting to levels where this is a trend change if it goes any further, in my opinion. Baba is a little bit more relative strength, so it had a mean reversion, but it's holding up pretty well. If they have bad Chinese news, then it's probably going to turn to some kind of a bear flag here. But if there's good Chinese news, then it could be on watch for a nice bounce and a build higher. BE, I actually took profits on this one in my, as like the swing thesis on this name, and not so much because the chart's breaking down or anything. In fact, I might be looking for this name to, get back in this upcoming week if that, recent low holds. But it was really when the market starts to go from risk on and very frothy to more risk off, even good quality names or even names that have been trending well in a good theme can get really hit. So when in doubt, I get out for the most part. You just go back to cash, you reassess, and then you look, if you want to participate in the swing again, you can basically, pick your spots for that. But I want to do that from a position of strength, not a position of, I'm already in this. There's actually a great scene in the movie, I think it's Pineapple Express, where James Franco's character is like in a dumpster, and he's like talking about places to hide, and the guy's like, let's find a better place to hide, and the guy was like, well, I'm already in the dumpster.
So I'm in the dumpster already.
And that's how I feel. A lot of people who are in like all these swing trades from a past cycle, that's what it ends up turning into, where it's, you want to make sure that you're not just in something because you're already in the dumpster or already in the stock for reasons that have already come and gone. You want to make sure that you're in things that you appreciate now, that make sense now, that have relative strength, that are trending with the market. And so that is a reason why I have no problem taking some profits on something and looking for a spot to get back in. So another one. So RGTI and the quantum names, this had a nice mean reversion trade, but I would say that this is still somewhat relative strength in the sector compared to some other ones like QUBT or even IONQ. So again, have that sector, on watch, and then sort it into the relative strength names like RGTI, QBTS, and then the relatively weak ones, QUBT and IONQ. And from there, if you have a view on the sector, or if the market is trending one way, if the sector is trending one way, you really have your go-to stocks already picked out there. And it's basically just finding some kind of level you can risk against if you're trying to continue a trend there. So Tesla has earnings this upcoming week. It's been consolidating pretty nicely. If you have some good earnings, some good growth, some decent catalysts, you could have a nice push. It's been basing here, so you could have some pretty tight risk levels, especially after earnings come out. But I will caution everyone that we've seen some news failures in this market, which means that even some stocks that have had good news recently, like ARM, they had a good partnership with Meta, I think, and it did nothing. It started to spike and it just flushed. So that is different in this. Over the last probably two months or so, almost every piece of good news has been met with increased buying. And now you're starting to get into a profit-taking zone where sometimes things have good news, and people who are like the big players in that, they'll use that as exit liquidity. And so people are like, well, why is this not going up on good news? Sometimes it's because people think that the sector or the stock needs to chill for a while, and they're using that positive news to exit. It's a little bit different when someone has $50 million, $100 million, $200 million worth of a stock. They need to pick their spots in order to be able to exit properly, as opposed to more smaller retail traders. So definitely be on watch for Tesla to build if there's positive news, but be cautious of that news failure. And if it starts to act heavy after even positive news, then that is a sign that we're in a different kind of cycle and you cannot fight that. Again, the critical mineral stocks, the rare earth stocks, they were very much in play over the past week. A ton of air came out of them. And again, I think a big part of the thesis of why these are running is, China's been holding out on some rare earth stuff. We're going into negotiations, and there's kind of been some hints that China's really taking a hard stance on some of these as a negotiation tactic, possibly. So that was kind of the read that I had on it. That's the read that the market had on it. And it just took a ton of the air out of these names, like, CRML. And like these names, they're tiny. A lot of them are not even producing any rare earths, and they're probably years away from ever producing that. So they get swept up in the narrative, and if the narrative changes, they go back down. So those were actually some great mean reversion trades. I had, I believe, the 25 puts, the 25 strike puts last week for CRML, and that was a very nice trade there. APLD holding up pretty well. Again, good news. It looked like a delayed reaction breakout there, but it kind of faded with the market. So still holding that level, around that 32-ish, mid 32s, but I wouldn't get too overly zealous, especially on a name that's in a sector that's picking some winners and losers right now. So if the market holds up, if the sector holds up, this could be on watch to build again. But you just don't want to be fighting something if it's breaking below key levels and it's the market's telling you it's not ready. ARM, we talked about the news failure there. If the market picks back up, possibly it starts to build back over those levels. But until it gets past there and the market's acting better, this is more just on watch. And Ariel has a great saying. He says, when the market is dipping, look for relative strength, but don't necessarily trade it yet. Just track it. Keep it on your watch list. Look for the names that are still acting fairly well. And a name that comes to mind for me in that situation is something like Walmart. So Walmart actually had very meaningful news with ChatGPT that it is integrating basically Walmart shopping into ChatGPT itself. So people will be able to almost like one-click buy as they're looking up things. So that is a huge piece of news. And that is relative strength for sure in this market. So again, doesn't necessarily mean it's the time to have a long position in this if the market is choppy. But if the market starts to act better, then those relative strength names are usually the go-tos and the first ones to really rally after that. Netflix has earnings this week. It's going to be a big tell because, recently, and it might not be totally included in this upcoming earnings or this earnings that they're about to report, but there was some content issues. Some people like Elon calling for boycotts or for cancellations. And so, you can see if that really spills into the business itself, if they comment on that, or if not, if it's a non-event, then maybe that this just trades on basically those earnings numbers. But just something to keep in mind, after long periods of consolidation, if it breaks one way or the other, it usually breaks pretty decisively. The market has had time to think, it's had time to digest and consolidate. So this is a big equilibrium range right here. And I think earnings could bust it out of that range one way or the other, and it'll probably be a pretty meaningful move. So you can draw your lines and then just be on watch for after the earnings to see if a setup surfaces there. Zion, I actually believe, has earnings this week. They already talked about the credit loss that they had. They had some people who they lent money to. They were a little bit fraudulent. They had to take a $50 or $60 million, basically had to shore up to make sure that loss was going to be absorbed. Okay, and that can spill into earnings and everything. So that had a big issue, and we've had a couple of other regional banks like JEF and some others that also had some issues, WAL. So keep a watch on this. As they report earnings, you'll be able to see how they comment on some of these things, and I think that will have a big impact on things like KRE, which is the regional banking ETF. Open, Eric Jackson's plays, you can definitely see they're starting to break down a little bit more. This is forming a nice base at that 680-ish level. And I think if we get under that, could have a big mean reversion and cycle change. But if it's just kind of stalling out or the market gets hot again, then maybe that is a level to risk off of for a long. But this is not something that I would typically long. This looks like it's consolidation. It's building up, a big base. It's probably trapping longs, actually. And if it breaks below that level, then I could see a big symmetrical flush back down to, who knows, maybe the 5 level. Gold and silver, this was the big mean reversion trade. So actually, what I like to say is when you have these, sectors or these moves that are having parabolic action, it's not only good to look for the mean reversion trade and, get that. And we caught a ton of these in Investors Underground. Nate was trading GLD and GLD puts. I was trading SLV and SLV puts. And so basically we had some really, really nice trades as this flushed down. But it's also good to study that, I think Josh Cherniak in Investors Underground, he has a great saying that, 24 or 48 hours before the best shorts make the best longs. And so, instead of just saying, oh, how could I have capitalized on this short? Something to say is, how could I have capitalized on this long possibly as this was speeding up? Was there a safe way that I could participate in that along the way. And a lot of times, some of the best traders are able to participate in the long side while they anticipate the short. And so, flipping your bias from long to short as opposed to just waiting for one or the other. And then another thing that I talk about is normalized action. So just because gold had a flush, yes, it could be ripe for a mean reversion, especially if you have trade tensions with China and the banking fears kind of ease up, then you could definitely have a huge mean reversion there. But this is not so different than this. It's not so different than this, not so different than a lot of these things. So just because you have a big flush does not necessarily mean a trend change. It is a potential, trend change or a mean reversion. Now, you do have increased volume, which increases the chances that it could be more of a local or a shorter term top there. But just keep in mind that just because there's one candle, you want to see it kind of break through those lows and form a lower high to really start a new trend to the downside. So that's something to keep in mind. The same thing with SLV and some of the miners, like silver miners like AG, because as the metals prices fall, then their margins and their profits get impacted by that as well. And then finally, as we go into Q3 earnings season, especially with the hyperscalers and the big FANG names, all those are going to be directly tied into how are they spending on CapEx and how is that tying into NVIDIA. And basically, NVIDIA is like 8% of the S&P right now. And so that is a total market leader and a behemoth. So you just have to watch, how is this doing? Is there strong demand, which it very much looks like there is. But, is it using that as an excuse to sell into that positive news and just kind of base and break down? Or is it actually, going to impact it positively? So those are the main ones that I had on watch for the week. Hopefully that was helpful. Again, a reminder that I'm going to open up the 2-week trial of IU for $49 for another 24 hours just for Sunday Scan listeners. So in order to get that deal, you have to email me at chris@investorsunderground.com. Email me and I will personally send you a link to get that deal another 24 hours. So if you want to try Investors Underground, if you want to trade alongside myself, Nate, Stan, Judah, Nick, all these guys in IU who are very experienced, just let me know and I will open up that deal for another 24 hours. So hopefully that was helpful to everyone. Short and sweet this week, but there's a lot of action. I hope to see everyone in IU and have a great week ahead.